Tanse, good afternoon. I'm Krista Nachkate. Welcome to APTN National News Daytime for this Tuesday. Leadership and health officials in Peguis First Nation are warning the community they need to take urgent action with hepatitis A. The province of Manitoba has since expanded its access to free hepatitis A vaccines for people 6 months and older following an ongoing outbreak of the virus. As of January 18th, Manitoba has recorded 308 confirmed cases of hepatitis A. Health officials say the virus spreads from person-to-person contact. Free vaccines are being made available in Garden Hill, St. Teresa Point, Wasagamak, Red Sucker Lake, and now the Peguis First Nation. The province says the vaccine is very effective in preventing infection, including after exposure to the virus. Hepatitis A is a highly contagious acute liver infection. It can spread through contaminated water, food, and close contact with someone who has the infection. Symptoms include fever, loss of appetite, nausea and vomiting, stomach pain, diarrhea, and the yellowing of the skin and eyes. Last November, a state of emergency was declared in Garden Hill after one person died from the virus. Peguis public health nurse Denise Baer says the number of infections in Peguis could be much higher, adding it's so important to get the vaccine.
We've had 13 cases of hepatitis A in Peguis, and of those 13 cases, we went into the home, did interviews, contact tracing. Other people were symptomatic. They were advised to go to the hospital. Some people didn't show up for their appointment, so we expect that that 13 number is actually triple what it is.
Monday was the beginning of the inquest into the death of 16-year-old Aisha Hudson in Winnipeg. The family, along with advocates and First Nations leaders, say they want changes to the justice system to prevent this incident from happening again. CTV's Jeff Keel reports.
16-year-old Aisha Hudson was shot and killed by police following a high-speed chase that ended here at Lagimodiere and Fermor. Now, almost 6 years later, an inquest into her death is underway.
Aisha Hudson deserves justice.
The hearing began with a traditional ceremony and opening statements by family members.
It's just painful just listening to the experience of the family and just hearing the hurt and the pain.
Hudson, an Indigenous teen, was fatally shot by police in April 2020 after a robbery at a Sage Creek liquor mart and a chase with a stolen Jeep. The vehicle she was driving crashed into another vehicle at Lagimodiere Boulevard in Fermor. The inquest will examine whether the use of force was appropriate and if systemic racism played a role. The province's Grand Chief hopes recommendations from the inquest will lead to changes to prevent this from happening again.
We're not looking for, any criminal or liable decisions, I guess, so to speak, within this process. We're just looking at the systemic change.
Manitoba's police watchdog, the Independent Investigation Unit, cleared police in 2021 of any criminal liability.
This investigation was a complete and thorough review of all available evidence. I'm satisfied that no stone was left unturned.
NDP MP Leah Gazan also wants to change how police are investigated. She feels the IIU is not fully independent.
I don't think former police officers, people that are involved in the system, are an impartial voice.
Aisha Hudson's inquest resumes today. In 2022, a judge made a ruling allowing Hudson's family to participate, as well as the Winnipeg Police Service, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Family Advocate, and the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth. Our Julia Ross will have more on this story in your evening newscast later today. The trial of Nick Tilsen, the founder and CEO of the Indian Collective, has ended with a hung jury. Indian Collective is an activist organization based on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Tilsen was charged with assault, aggravated assault, and obstruction of a law enforcement officer. The charges stem from an incident in 2022 in Rapid City, South Dakota, where Tilsen said he stopped to observe an interaction between an unhoused man and a local police officer. The officer involved said Tilsen came at him with his truck, but video evidence did not back that up decisively. After 3 days of testimony last week, the jury was unable to come to a unanimous decision and a mistrial was declared. The state has 45 days to appeal. The family of the late Sharon Boccini lost their fight at Ontario's Court of Appeal to get her Indian status back. Their story of how they lost status began more than 100 years ago in the Sandy Bay First Nation in Manitoba. That's when Boccini's grandfather, St. Pierre Cook, accepted Métis scrip. Last spring, the Boccini family attended the appeal hearing at Osgoode Hall in Toronto for their mother's case. Steve Boccini first applied for his mother's status in 1998, and she was awarded that status in 2007. But 2 years later, in 2009, the Register at Indigenous Affairs deregistered Sharon because her grandfather had accepted Métis scrip. Sharon later passed away on July 4th in 2024, shortly after a lower court overturned the Register's decision, giving her status despite her death. However, the federal government appealed that decision, and last Friday, Justice Jonathan George sided with the 2009 decision to remove Sharon's status. Steve Boccini said they'll appeal that decision.
Fights in me to keep moving forward, to get my ancestors, my family, their rights, we should have been allowed to go back into treaty back in when they allowed the whole band back in. Should have been allowed back then. And here we are 100-something years later, 1885. Oh my God, everybody else was allowed back in.
5 Ontario First Nations have joined the legal fight against Ontario's Bill 5 and the federal government's Bill C5. That brings together a total of 14 Ontario First Nations into the litigation, which began in July of last year. The implementation of Bills 5 and C5 would mean Ontario and Canada could push through with proposed developments like the controversial Ring of Fire. There has been a large-scale opposition to both bills ever since they were introduced and fast-tracked into legislation. With little to no input from First Nations, many of them argue the proposed major economic Ring of Fire resource development will threaten their way of life. That's why 5 more First Nations have joined a constitutional challenge of the fast-track bills at Ontario's Superior Court. Lawyer Kate Kempton says there has been a growing concern with the government's decision-making.
Every citizen should care that their governments are giving themselves, frankly, dictatorial powers. And a lot of that's gone under the radar, and it shouldn't. But particularly Indigenous nations struggling to get back everything that was stolen from them over the last 250 years, especially their decision-making authority over what happens to, in, and on their land.
The people of the Kashechewan First Nation in Northern Ontario are dealing with another issue since the community declared a state of emergency on January 4th. Medical personnel are now evacuating from the First Nation after the parasite Cryptosporidium was found inside the community's drinking water. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver reports.
The several hundred people remaining in the fly-in community of Kashechewan may soon be without medical care. The medical staff are pulling out soon, a month after a state of emergency was called in the Northern Ontario community of about 2,300 people. Once the confirmation of the Cryptosporidium was in the water supply, Health Canada, I think, and their health teams decided that they have to remove their nurses out of the community. The paramedics will follow. Indigenous Services Canada says the community's nurses are expected to depart today, but that Orange Air will be on standby if needed. The residents who are choosing not to evacuate will have to drive about an hour away to Fort Albany Hospital for care. Roughly 370 people are still there. We're starting to make plans to get these individuals or these families out of the community. Evacuations began last month when a state of emergency was called after the community's water treatment system failed, sending sewage into people's homes and contaminating freshwater systems. Late last week, tests confirmed the parasite Cryptosporidium was found in the community's water system, the same parasite that made more than 60 people sick.
It doesn't take much of this infection to ingest to actually get us sick. And the primary syndrome of this infection is a gastrointestinal syndrome.
This latest incident comes after the community found E. coli in their water in 2005. And while engineers are looking at solutions, So far, there is no timeline for when the water will be safe enough for the community to return. And even then, Wesley says trust in the water has eroded.
It is going to take some time, a lot of time for people to regain that trust.
Indigenous Services Canada says there are plans for alternative access to healthcare, including virtual care for residents. The department says the nurses will start returning to Saskatchewan when the community members do as well. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
The Millbrook First Nation has added more than 7 hectares to its reserve land in Tufts Cove in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, that includes a first-of-its-kind water lot. The First Nation, which lived on the land until the Halifax explosion in 1917, have reacquired the property through something called the Addition to Reserve process. The chief says the plan is to infill Tufts Cove, which is not considered navigable according to the Port of Halifax.
We're looking at a mixed commercial residential development, which is going to be now in today's terms in excess of probably about $500 million investment within in this area, and doing it one project at a time and doing a development.
In addition to the residential and commercial development, the chief says there is a plan for some cultural components as well. Work on all of this is expected to begin later this year. Another First Nation is warning its members not to travel to the United States. Huayat First Nation on Vancouver Island in BC has issued a travel advisory, citing concerns about ICE agents and potential issues at the border. Huayat First Nation has issued a travel advisory because of the immigration crackdown in the U.S. Members who can usually cross with a status card under their treaty rights are now being urged to also carry passports and birth certificates if traveling to the States.
We are concerned that immigration enforcement isn't entirely aware of how that works, and therefore an enhanced status card or other types of identification may not be enough. We have quite a big branch of one of the major families of our community live in the Bellingham area, as well as a strong core of citizens who live in California.
The nation says the advisory is precautionary, as no issues have been reported so far. In southern Alberta, the Blood Tribe has also issued a travel advisory, citing reports that status cards in the Jay Treaty have not been respected. When we come back, Tina House will have a new report on the drug crisis in Vancouver. That story after the break. Don't go away. Thanks for staying with us. Now to British Columbia, where the provincial government's pilot program to decriminalize small amounts of drugs has come to an end. APTN's Tina House takes a closer look at what's happening as the war on drugs rages on, and a warning, some of the images in this report may be disturbing.
Vancouver, BC, voted one of the top places in the world to live. But right in the city are 10 square blocks that make up Vancouver's downtown east side. Although the toxic drug crisis is not limited to just the downtown east side, there isn't anywhere else where the sad reality of drug addiction is more open. With hundreds of people struggling on the streets to survive, many here are also heavily addicted. James Harry is a former drug addict. 7 years ago, he, alongside his wife Janet, decided to get clean and change their lives for good. He founded a nonprofit called the All Nations Outreach that helps others get sober. We drove through the neighborhood that once represented so much pain and loss for him to talk about his experience.
Has it gotten any better?
No, it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse. With what's in these drugs today, you know, that they're, you know, that it was around that time is, you know, it was crack and heroin and alcohol. But now after that, the ports were shut down, and you know the gangs and dealers have to get creative, and they you know, and now this fentanyl is introduced. It's already there, but it you know, it is basically the main drug now. You drive by here, you walk by here, you see everybody hunched over in 3 different directions, or face down into a dirty bacteria-filled alley, right?
In January of 2023, what was hailed as a lifeline to help save lives, the BC and federal government approved a 3-year program that would make it legal to carry 2.5 grams of drugs.
As we all know, there is no recovery for someone who is dead. Last May, I announced that our government had approved an exemption request from the province of British Columbia so that adults 18 years and over in the province found in the personal possession of up to 2.5 grams of certain illegal drugs for personal use would not be arrested, criminally charged, or have their drugs seized.
Now, 3 years later, that pilot program has come to an end, with many critics saying it didn't work, including James Harry.
I give them credit for trying. They tried, but right, and I mentioned it before. All we're doing is giving these dealers a free pass and confidence to walk around with drugs in their pocket and not worry about getting pinched, right?
In 2016, the opioid epidemic exploded, and here in British Columbia, 16,000 people lost their lives to toxic drugs. Since then, the BC government has tried everything to help the situation. We sat down with BC Health Minister Josie Osborne to talk about the provincial government's plans on what they're doing next on the war on drugs.
Not one person is not touched by this crisis, and that's why we must continue to take an all-hands-on-deck approach, using all the tools and options that we have to build out a complete and comprehensive system of care that addresses everything from social determinants of health that impact reasons why people struggle with mental health and substance use, early interventions, prevention, treatment and recovery, and supporting people through recovery with aftercare and what they need, because for so many people this is a lifelong journey.
Here on Vancouver's downtown east side, undoubtedly ground zero, many are wondering what can be done next to help those that are suffering with addiction. We met Holly Russell, who grew up in West Vancouver. She's been living on the streets for over 15 years and addicted to drugs. She has overdosed 4 times. Russell says the government has to do more to help others like her.
The safer supply, they should still be doing it. It helped a lot of people.
But Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says the BC government needs to go back to the 4-pillar approach of harm reduction, prevention, treatment, and enforcement.
We were on a track that I thought was progressive in terms of harm reduction and decriminalizing the possession and use of small amounts of drugs that addicts require on a daily basis. But because of the extremism, the right-wing extremism, through political parties like the BC Conservative Party, now the province has abandoned that and has recriminalized possession and public use of drugs.
But the crisis hits closer to home for him. 7 years ago, his oldest son Kenny, who was sober for a long time, decided to use one more time, not knowing that he took a fatal dose of carfentanil. He died instantly.
And he was gone before he hit the floor. So I have other members. One of my nieces was murdered in a drug war in the Okanagan. One of my nephews overdosed. So it's taking a huge number of our family members. And I would like to remind people that this is not simply an issue for governments or for policing. We all carry a responsibility to do what we can to support the people that carry an addiction.
The BC government says they are now focused on building more treatment centers to try and stop this crisis from taking more lives. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We now want to tell you about last week's web poll results. Our first question was, How do the recent ICE actions impact your plans to travel to the United States? The absolute majority of 54% said, I'm avoiding travel for now. 37% are still okay with traveling. 5% are unsure. And 4% say they're canceled their trips. Our second question was, are you concerned about your privacy when using TikTok? 27% are concerned, while 20% are not, 9% are unsure, and 44% of respondents say they don't use TikTok. And lastly, we asked, do you think press freedom is at risk in Canada? 67% of answers say it is, 17% say it is not, and 16% are unsure. Thanks for taking the time to cast your votes. Go to our website at aptnnews.ca to see this week's new web poll questions. We have more news after the break. Don't go away. Big West for staying with us. St. John's -1, Charlottetown -1. -10 in Cartwright and sunny there. Happy Valley, Goose Bay -9. Saguenay -13. Gaspé -4. Ottawa, Fleury's in -9. Peterborough -4. Sudbury -12. Elliott Lake -13. Puckatawaga and Clear Skies in -12. Thompson -17. Gimli -22. Dauphin partly cloudy and -7. -5 in Regina. Estevan cloudy and -2. Buffalo Narrows -5. La Ronge -8. Cloudy in Peace River at 1. Fort McMurray 4. 11 in Calgary. Edmonton 2. Vancouver 15. Penticton 6. Prince Rupert showers and 9. Smithers cloudy and 7. Whitehorse 1. Watson Lake -5. -18 in Wrigley. Yellowknife -13. Paulatuck -28. -34 in Sax Harbor. Cambridge Bay -25. Baker Lake -24. And Arctic Bay -36. Resolute -32. The Grand Chief of Manitoba, Kiiwetinoong Okimaganak, Garrison Setti, is tonight's guest on an all-new episode of Face to Face. The MKO represents the interests of 26 First Nations in northern Manitoba, many who were part of last summer's wildfire evacuations. Setti believes the evacuation of tens of thousands of people was poorly executed.
I think that there's chaos, and I think that our people were put into situations that they didn't have to be put in, and the registration process is a disaster. And I think that the problem there is because it was not Indigenous-led. And anytime you have to deal with our people, you have to be familiar with our culture and our language and also the demographics in which we have to live. If you don't understand that, you can't really effectively coordinate an evacuation. And I think that we should have learned by now. You know, this is not the first evacuation, and hopefully that we don't have to have any more mass evacuations like this.
And make sure to catch that all-new episode of Face to Face later today, right after your evening news. And that's your daytime newscast for this Tuesday. Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast in a few hours. Please join us then. Thanks so much for watching.